Hey there everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is Prickly Hedgehog. Something a little different today because today I'll be talking about Mountain Blade 2 BannerLord, which is a first-person, third-person, real-time combat and strategy game brought to us by Tailworlds. Now the game is set in a fictitious world known as Calradia during what would be the equivalent of medieval Europe, so roughly 1000 AD, early on in the feudal empire period. Now the map and world environment kind of mimics that period. It looks a little similar to Europe in terms of the shape and obviously the geography and the flora and fauna, but obviously it's not as large and is centered around the equivalent of what would be a Holy Roman Empire during that time, with Britannic-like kingdoms to the west and Turkish-like kingdoms towards the east, which also includes obviously Asia Minor and extends into parts of the Middle East as well. And then there are Germanic and Nordic kingdoms to the north. So very, very similar to a world which we recognize as I said, medieval Europe. Now, the kingdoms have obviously all been renamed, but they are as follows. We have 8 kingdoms: Britannia Kingdom, the Sturgians, the Valandians, or Valandians, I think it is, the Aserai, the Kuzites, and then we have the Empire that I mentioned before, which is kind of central to the map. And this is broken into 3 sections, north, south, and west, which gives us our 8 kingdoms. Now, way back in 2008, I found this game, sort of stumbled upon it. And as I said, it's made by Tailworlds, and they did a lovely job. It quickly became one of my favorite games. While the graphics weren't the best and some of the elements to the game were a little bit perhaps cheesy, it was a very complex game. It was a lot of fun, and as I said, it very quickly became one of my favorite games. And I think this new iteration is going to work its way back into my favorite game list. And my early impressions are extremely favorable, and I'm just going to give you an overview of what those early impressions are and what this game is kind of about. So, if you're considering buying it, I already can give you a thumbs up because I think it's very good. Now, I don't want to get into too much nitty-gritty detail, and the reason for that is because partly the game is really complex, and I've really only got a limited working knowledge of it at this time, even though I'm familiar with the older game. So my primary aim here really is to kind of give you an overview of the things that I like thus far. Now remember too that this is an early access version of the game. It's already been subject to several updates, so any of the footage that you may see may be subject to change and may change in later iterations of the game as it goes through updates. It's early release. There isn't an official, yep, this is it. There's still some work in progress, and there's a lot of bug squashing and stuff going on. So let's go through some of those broad aspects of the game's attributes that I think are both the crux of the game's aim and goals, and ones which I think are done very well. So we'll start with the character development. And when I first saw this, I thought, I could create, I think I could create some celebrities. There was quite a lot of manipulation that you could do of the character's face, and it's very similar to a lot of role-playing games of this type. You begin with that opportunity to build and fashion a character. You get to create, as I said, this really detailed face, either male or female, that you can change the ethnicity, color of the skin and the eyes and all that kind of stuff. And then you can choose from a bunch of different options to build basically the character's backstory, and then again enhance this ethnic origin based on the kingdoms that I mentioned before, where that character comes from. And then each of those kingdoms, of course, brings slightly different attributes, which may or may not help later on in the game. But things like movement speed through trees or snow, or another one is the experience points bonuses of yourself and your troops, which again may or may not be helpful. It's not critical to choose one over the other, but it just is something to think about if you're going down one particular path. But I think you'll find there's a lot of playability in this game and lots of playthroughs too. So don't get too bogged down if you choose one element and you wish you chose another one. It shouldn't be a deal breaker in the game. Now, probably one of the coolest things in the game is combat. And the developers have really done a lot of work. They've made a great effort to make the first-person and third-person combat look really realistic. And obviously you can look from the position of the head when I say first-person, but you can also get a over-the-shoulder look as well. And I believe you can even change the camera if you're left-handed or right-handed, or at least you used to be able to do it in the old game, if I remember rightly, but I could be wrong. Now, you can, of course, fight on foot, which is one of the primary means of fighting. But you can also engage in horse-mounted combat as well, which you'll probably find you're doing most of the time because you're moving between places, especially early on in that mercenary role that you initially take in the game. Now you can use obviously polearms, swords, or even ranged combat with the bow. You've also got short-ranged weapons such as javelins, throwing knives, or axes. And the combat is, as the studio describes, pretty easy to learn, but it's hard to master, and things do become easier as the character skills develop, but it takes a while for them to evolve and for you to get used to the idiosyncrasies of using all of these different weapons, and also the techniques involved in parrying blows or delivering blows or aiming the ranged weapons. Now, the weapons themselves, like I said, are skillfully recreated, and they have their idiosyncrasies to be aware of. So, large two-handed axes can deliver, killing blows, sometimes in one shot, but they don't offer any protection from ranged weapons like a shield does. And if you have a two-handed axe, you can't use a shield with them. So, again, you've got to figure out whether or not you're going to stick with that particular weapon, or you're going to change it up and move it around a little bit. Based on your particular needs at a particular time. I think in the old game I used to just carry an axe for siege purposes, so I could just smash enemies to pieces as I climbed over the walls. But when I wanted to do horse riding and I wanted a shield, or if I was invading something else that it wasn't, there was a chance I was going to get more ranged weaponry, or I needed to block, then I would take the shield in. So now, due to the size and weight, of course, of those bigger weapons like the two-handed axes or two-handed swords, then it also limits the number of times you can actually strike. But while that might make you vulnerable to a more agile opponent, if you do hit them and you get a good blow on, you're probably going to knock them down with one shot, especially if they're a weaker opponent. So, like I said, there's a plethora of weapons out there to choose from, as mentioned, and all to suit all sorts of playstyles as you see fit. If you want to stay an archer and use that particular weapon, then by all means. And that's what's really cool about this game. All of the different weapon types are done really, really well. Now, of course, as there are weapons, there's also armor as well. So you can adorn your character and also your NPC heroes, which you can hire as you go around your various cities looking for people to hire, including troops and, as I said, these NPC heroes. You can adorn them with a range of different armor types. So we're talking obviously the body armor, which protects the chest area and the upper back, and also you've got helmets, mailed gloves, boots and capes, and other bits and pieces which you can adorn the character. And these have, again, pluses and minuses. Heavier armor means more protection, but it's also heavier and slower to make your character move, so you may not be able to keep up with your teammates if they're running around the battlefield and you're trying to keep up with them, because you're going to be a little bit slower. So you can purchase these items at the various cities within the environment, or you can capture them as loot, spoils from successful combats, especially if you go in against superior lords and things like that, who often have good stuff to steal off them, or if they have a lot of characters that have higher skill levels or better armored, sometimes you end up with some good stuff if you're lucky enough to win the battle, and that's part of the game. So have fun. All right, now, as I said, this is a complex game. It's not one that is one-dimensional, while the combat is fantastic. If you want to get into other elements of the game, which eventually you kind of are going to want to do anyway, there is a really good economy. Now, the developers have talked about basically a pretty complex feudal economy. They've based the economy, like I said, on feudal lines. So the supply of goods and things like that, the production and stuff, is going to be disrupted by things like wars and sieges. And I actually went into a castle once after I'd sieged it and successfully captured it with another army that I was piggybacking on, and I went to go and buy some new food because my NPC players would run out of food as we were following this army around, and there was no food because it had been taken away in the siege. So things like that are really realistic and kind of add that extra layer of complexity to the game. So you can, as I said, you can purchase workshops and engage in this manufacture and sale and distribution of goods throughout the empire, which again adds this extra layer of complexity to it. It's not just simply reduced to hacking and slashing roles, which also leads to this next component, which is the politics and the diplomacy. Now, as I said, we've got all these different kingdoms within the environment, and you can, of course, at some point join one of these factions if that is your desire, if you want to transition from sort of the mercenary role, which is a lot of fun, but after a while maybe can get a little bit repetitive, if you want to join in the politics and maybe empire building, you can do that. You can join one of these factions, become a lord or a lady in your own right, not just a simple mercenary. Now, joining a faction, you can do that either through influence, by being well supported or popular within the lord's eyes or the king's eyes of that particular faction, or you may also do it by marriage as well, by influence other lower ranked lords, and maybe get the hand of marriage of a particular family from a lady within that family. And that will increase your standing within the ranks of that particular faction. And you may end up earning or buying or inheriting your own small fiefdom. So now you've got to, instead of managing a bunch of NPC characters and 100 or so soldiers or whatever it is, now you're on a much larger scale. You're requiring a sort of fiscal responsibility, managing a small fiefdom, farms and other means of production, and you also have to militarily protect that asset as well from looting and hostile takeovers. So, and then if you transition from that to the entire kind of kingdom, perhaps if you are lucky enough to build up enough to get to a kingdom, now you're doing it on a grand scale, which I think is one of the cool things about this game. So you in simple terms, you start off as a mercenary, fighting small battles, and then you can end up actually becoming maybe the king of a particular empire. That's the aim of this game, and that's what the potential is if you desire it, or if you're just happy to run around and get into the hacking and slashing roles of a mercenary, maybe that's what you would prefer. But there's a lot of different layers in this game, which I think is really, really cool. Now, in summation, the 2020 version is considerably reworked over the old one. Obviously, it's been almost 12 years since the release of the previous version, and the game has undergone a major reworking, and it's a lot more sophisticated. The music is really cool. They actually have a band of musicians that they had hired who are into medieval music, and reading all about that was really, really cool. So that layer of immersion is really, really interesting. The music is really, really fantastic, especially when you go to these little taverns and you can hear this music playing. It is based on legitimate medieval music from the time period, and there's a lot of different influences or musical styles because of all the blending of a lot of different cultures at that time. So it's really, really cool music. I have a history major. I'm a history major. I graduated with a history degree, and I have an English minor. And this particular game really appeals to me. I really enjoy this period of history, and I think this kind of brings to life that period, even though it's not truly accurate down to the every little detail, but it gives you kind of a broad overview of what that kind of feudal life was like. And God, it must have sucked to be a peasant. And it's fun. I really like seeing it, even though it's not, as I said, a recreation of medieval Europe. It borrows heavily from that time period and uses a lot of stuff that is accurate and relevant. And again, it just kind of gives a visual impression or an immersive opportunity into a period of history, which I find very, very interesting. So if that's not your bent about the history side of it, then you'll still enjoy the game if you like sort of first-person combat of this nature. This is very, very well done. So one of the things I really noticed too was just how cool the physics was, particularly the modeling of the blows of the weapons, the blocking and stuff like that. They've done a really good job of when players are, or at least non-playing NPCs, if you like, and the AI, when they die or are knocked unconscious, the fall. There is the fall of the enemies when they fall over and stuff like that, or reel back from a blow, is pretty cool. The arms and things, they fall in a realistic way, which I think is really neat. Now it is gory, of course. There is a little bit more blood and splatter and stuff like that. Some of the blood on the ground is a little bit more realistic than the previous game. So there is a little bit more blood and gore, but you're not, as far as I'm aware at this time, you're not hacking off limbs or heads or anything like that, legs and stuff, or spilling people's guts all over the ground. So it's not like it's a truly realistic representation of what military combat would have been like during that time, which was pretty awful. But it does, again, like I said, recreate some of those elements, the sort of crush that you have when two great armies kind of pile together. There wasn't a lot of you know, we always assume when you see some of these movies, you know, Braveheart and stuff like that, where there's a lot of people, you know, swinging swords or getting involved in complex swordplay. In reality, there was a lot of just crushing and, you know, pulverizing your enemy and stabbing, and a lot of people were just kind of crushed from the weight of all the bodies against each other. Certainly later on, when the great horses from the knights came through. I mean, these massive Clydesdale type horses that they used, which were, you know, strong enough to support the massive amount of weight that these guys were carrying, and they simply just rode across the top of most of these armies and just crushed them down. You know, just the sheer weight of the horses. And it was a slow charge in relative terms compared to, say, the faster horses used in the Middle East and you know, Asia Minor, which were sort of fast range combat type horses. But certainly the big palfreys and stuff that they use, you know, they just crush people. And then the swords themselves too, it's kind of nicely recreated. Like the big long straight swords, they weren't necessarily cutting instruments so much. It's just the weight of them would just smash. You know, it would cut obviously a little bit, but and cut through stuff. But it was more of just a, you know, pulverizing weapon as much as anything. The Crusaders, then when they went to the Middle East, were very impressed with the swords of the Saracens and those groups, because they were curved. They could see that it was a much better cutting instrument, whereas their straight-edged swords were more, just like I said, designed to smash helmets basically, or penetrate through with a thrust. So it's really, really interesting stuff. And this game creates some of that a little bit. You can see when you go into the weapons details, you will see what the individual weapon is capable of, how fast it moves, the weight of it, and how easy it is to wield in combat. So lots and lots of stuff. So there's really, you know, if you were familiar with the old game, all the old elements really are there for the most part, but it's been enhanced greatly. Graphically, it's a lot more impressive. And right now, as this stands, I think this is a great, great game. If you're interested in sort of medieval combat and also strategy and trade and diplomacy type stuff, then this is a game for you. I really, really recommend it. Alright, well, I think that's enough waffle. I hope you got something from this. I'll try and bring you more updates about this game as time goes forward, and maybe delve into a little bit more depth as I become more familiar with the game. For now, like I said, I think that'll do. Yeah, carry on conquering if that's your bent. This is Prickly Hedgehog out. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you around.